The demolition notice arrived on a Friday. Lisa Chen stared at the yellow paper, taped to what was left of the chain-link fence. Her 7-year-old son Marcus tugging at her jacket, asking if they could please go home because it was cold, and he was hungry. 3 days. That's all the time she had, before the wrecking crew would arrive to finish tearing down the building she'd bought for $500 at a county auction nobody else had bothered to attend. Lisa pressed her forehead against the steering wheel of her 15-year-old Honda, the one with the check engine light that had been on for 6 months. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. And tried not to cry in front of her son. She was 34 years old, had worked 2 jobs since Marcus was born, and somehow she'd ended up here, betting their last $500 on a half-demolished factory that the city wanted gone so badly they'd practically given it away. The Riverside Machine Works had been built in 1947, back when Riverside, Ohio was a booming industrial town churning out parts for the automotive industry. Now it was a ghost, 80% demolished, with only the oldest section still standing, a 3-story brick building with most of its windows blown out, and graffiti covering what walls remained. The rest of the complex had already been torn down, leaving mountains of rubble and twisted metal that made the property look like a war zone. "Mom, why did we buy this place?" Marcus asked for the 100th time, his breath fogging in the November air. Nobody else wanted it. "Sometimes, baby," Lisa said, forcing herself to straighten up. "The things nobody else wants turn out to be exactly what we need." But even as she said it, she wondered if she'd finally made the mistake that would break them. The factory had been cheap because it was supposed to be demolished completely. The city had started the teardown 2 years ago, then run out of money halfway through. They'd sealed the remaining building and walked away, leaving it to rot, until Lisa saw the auction listing and saw something nobody else did. Square footage, space, possibility. Her house cleaning business, Chen's Spotless Services, had outgrown her garage. She needed somewhere to store equipment, supplies, maybe even set up a small office. And at $500 for nearly 12,000 square feet of the original factory building, even half ruined, it was the only chance she'd ever have to own something. The county clerk had looked at her like she was insane when she'd placed the winning bid. "Ma'am, you understand that building is scheduled for demolition? You'll be responsible for either completing the teardown yourself or bringing it up to code. Either one will cost you tens of thousands." Lisa had signed the papers anyway. She didn't have tens of thousands, she barely had 500, but she had something more valuable: desperation and a stubborn refusal to give up. That had been 3 weeks ago. Since then, she'd spent every spare moment at the factory, trying to assess what she'd actually bought. The building was in worse shape than she'd hoped, but better than she'd feared. The structure was sound, the old brick walls thick and solid. The floors had held her weight when she'd carefully tested them. It was dirty, damaged, and dangerous. But it was hers. Until the demolition notice. Apparently, the city had found money in the budget to finish the job. They'd given her 3 days to salvage anything she wanted before the wrecking balls came. 3 days to make $500 worth something, anything, or watch it all turn to dust. "Come on," Lisa said, climbing out of the car. "Let's see what we can save." They'd been inside the factory twice before, but always during the day with plenty of sunlight filtering through the broken windows. Now, at 4:30 in November, darkness was already falling. Lisa's heavy-duty flashlight pushed back shadows, but couldn't quite banish the oppressive atmosphere of abandonment. "I don't like it here," Marcus whispered, pressing close to her side. "Me neither, buddy. But sometimes we have to do things that scare us." The main floor was vast, ceiling 20 feet high, supported by iron columns that had turned orange with rust. Ancient machinery sat in corners, too heavy for the demolition crew to bother with before they'd run out of money. The floor was concrete, cracked and stained with decades of oil and chemicals, littered with debris that crunched under their feet. Lisa had a plan, sort of. Salvage the good lumber from the interior walls. Grab any copper pipes or wiring she could safely remove. Maybe some of the old industrial lighting fixtures, the kind that hipster restaurants paid hundreds for. Sell it all on Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace. Try to recoup her $500 plus enough for next month's rent on their tiny apartment. They worked until Marcus started yawning, pulling boards loose and stacking them by the door. It was mindless, exhausting work, and Lisa's hands were raw despite her gloves. But there was something almost meditative about it. The physical labor pushing away the constant anxiety about bills and the future, and how she was going to afford Marcus's school supplies next semester. She was prying up a section of baseboard when her crowbar punched through the wall into empty space behind it. Lisa paused, frowning. She'd assumed the walls were solid brick, but this one clearly had a gap. She worked the crowbar deeper, pulling away more plaster and lathe, and felt a rush of stale air from the opening. "Marcus, bring me the big flashlight." Her son scrambled over, curiosity overriding his earlier nervousness. Lisa shone the light into the gap and felt her heart skip. Behind the wall was a space, maybe 4 feet deep, running the length of the room. Not just a gap in the construction, but a deliberate hidden compartment. "Whoa," Marcus breathed. "Is it a secret room?" "I think it's a false wall," Lisa said, her mind racing. They used to build these in old factories sometimes, for storage or to hide things during Prohibition. She pulled away more plaster, widening the opening until she could squeeze through. The space beyond was narrow but long, and her flashlight revealed something that made her gasp. Metal containers, dozens of them, stacked from floor to ceiling. Each one was about the size of a shoebox, made of steel, with heavy-duty locks. "Mom, what is it?" "I don't know yet." "Stay there, baby." Lisa pulled out the nearest container. It was heavier than it looked, and when she shook it gently, something shifted inside with a sound like rocks in a can. She carried it back through the opening to where Marcus waited, her hands trembling. The lock was old, but solid. She attacked it with her crowbar, leveraging, prying, until finally the metal gave way with a screech. Lisa set down the crowbar and lifted the lid, and for a moment her brain couldn't process what she was seeing. Stones. Clear, glittering stones that caught her flashlight beam and threw rainbows across the dirty floor. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, ranging in size from a pea to a grape, loose in the container like someone had just dumped them in and locked it away. "Pretty rocks," Marcus said, reaching for one. "Don't touch." Lisa's voice came out sharper than she intended. Her hands shook as she picked up one of the larger stones, holding it up to the light. She wasn't an expert, but she'd watched enough late-night TV to know what diamonds looked like. And these, God help her, looked like diamonds. Her first thought was that they couldn't be real. Nobody left real diamonds in abandoned factories. Her second thought was that if they were real, someone had hidden them here for a reason, and that reason probably wasn't good. Her third thought was that Marcus was depending on her, and she was 2 months behind on their apartment rent, with an eviction hearing scheduled for next week. Lisa's hands were shaking so badly she could barely replace the stone. She closed the container, then sat back on her heels, trying to think through the ringing in her ears. This wasn't happening. Things like this didn't happen to people like her, to single mothers who cleaned houses and drove cars with check engine lights and bought demolished factories for $500 because they were out of options. But the weight of the container in her lap was undeniable. The glitter of the stones was unmistakable. And when she looked back at the opening in the wall, at the dozens of other containers stacked in that hidden space, she felt something shift in her chest. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Terror and hope in equal measure. "Mom, are you okay?" Marcus's small voice cut through her spiral. Lisa pulled him close, smelling the cheap shampoo in his hair. "Yeah, baby. I'm okay. I think we found something important." She spent the next hour carefully pulling containers from the hidden space, counting them, assessing. 38 containers in total, each one locked, each one heavy with the sound of stones. She didn't open any more. Didn't want to know yet. Didn't want to face what this might mean. It was nearly 8 when they finally left. One container hidden in a garbage bag in her trunk, the factory door locked behind them. Lisa had spent the drive home in silence, her mind racing through possibilities and consequences. Marcus had fallen asleep in his booster seat, exhausted from the long day. Their apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades. The carpet in the hallway was stained, the walls thin enough to hear neighbors arguing. But it was home, or at least it had been until the eviction notice. Now, it was just another place they were about to lose. Lisa carried Marcus inside, tucked him into bed still in his clothes because he was dead weight when he slept. Then she sat at their tiny kitchen table, the container in front of her, and tried to figure out what the hell she was supposed to do. Calling the police seemed like the obvious answer. But Lisa had learned the hard way that obvious answers didn't always work out well for people like her. She'd grown up poor, knew how quickly authorities could decide you were the problem rather than helping you with the problem. If these stones were stolen, if they were connected to something criminal, she could lose them and end up in legal trouble herself. She needed information first, needed to know what she was dealing with before she made any decisions. Lisa opened her laptop, the one with the cracked screen she'd been unable to afford to fix, and started searching. Riverside Machine Works history. The factory had been in operation from 1947 to 1989, producing precision parts for the automotive industry. During its peak in the 60s and 70s, it had employed over 300 people. Then the recession hit, orders dried up, and the factory closed. It sat empty for decades before. The city bought it for back taxes and started the demolition that had run out of money halfway through. Nothing about diamonds, nothing about any connection to jewelry or precious stones. Lisa dug deeper, searching old newspaper archives, local history sites, anything that might explain why someone would hide a fortune in an auto parts factory. She found it at 2 in the morning, her eyes burning from staring at the screen. A small article from the Riverside Gazette, dated September 1977, local factory site of federal investigation. The article was frustratingly vague, mentioning only that federal agents had raided Riverside Machine Works as part of a larger investigation into interstate commerce violations. No arrests were mentioned. No details about what they were looking for or what they found, but the timing made Lisa's skin prickle. 1977 was right in the middle of the factory's profitable years, and just 10 years before it closed permanently. She kept searching and found more pieces. References to the factory owner, a man named Richard Drummond, who died in 1989, just months before the factory closed. Mentions of his luxury lifestyle that had seemed incongruous with running a struggling manufacturing business. Whispers of federal interest that never quite turned into charges. By 3 a.m., Lisa had constructed a theory that made her stomach turn. Riverside Machine Works had been a front, or at least a side business, for something else. The federal investigation suggested smuggling, and diamonds were small, portable, and incredibly valuable. Easy to hide in legitimate industrial shipments, easy to store in false walls of factory buildings. Richard Drummond had died before the investigation could bear fruit. The factory had closed, been forgotten, sat empty for 3 decades. And somewhere in all that time, 38 containers of diamonds had been sealed behind a wall, waiting for someone desperate enough to buy a half-demolished building and start tearing it apart. Lisa closed her laptop and stared at the container on her table. If her theory was right, these diamonds were probably stolen, smuggled, the proceeds of crimes committed before she was born. But Richard Drummond was dead. The factory had gone through multiple owners, none of whom had found the hidden cash. She'd bought the building legally, at a public auction. Did that make the diamonds hers? The question kept her awake the rest of the night, watching the sky lighten outside her window, listening to Marcus's soft breathing from his bedroom. She thought about the eviction notice, about the $500 she'd gambled on a demolished factory, about 7 years of scrubbing toilets and mopping floors, and never quite getting ahead no matter how hard she worked. She thought about Marcus, who deserved new shoes that fit properly, and a winter coat that didn't have duct tape on the sleeves, who deserved school field trips and birthday parties, and a mother who didn't cry in the car when she thought he wasn't looking. By the time Marcus woke up, Lisa had made her decision. She would find out if the diamonds were real. If they were, she'd figure out a way to sell them, quietly and carefully. And if that made her a criminal, if that made her someone who profited from someone else's crimes, well, she'd add it to the list of things she felt guilty about while still doing them, because her son needed food and shelter more than she needed a clear conscience. The problem was, she had no idea how to fence diamonds. Was that even the right word? Lisa felt like she was in a movie, a bad one, where the naive protagonist made stupid decisions and ended up dead or in prison. She needed help, but who could she trust with something like this? The answer came while she was dropping Marcus at school, watching him run toward the building with his too small backpack bouncing against his shoulders. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the name she was looking for, David Park. David had been her lab partner in high school, back before her life had derailed into teenage pregnancy and dropping out. He'd gone on to college, graduate school, become some kind of gemologist, working for an insurance company in Columbus. They'd reconnected on Facebook a few years back, exchanged occasional messages about nothing much. Lisa's finger hovered over his name. Once she made this call, once she involved someone else, there was no going back. But sitting in the school parking lot, watching her son disappear into a building where other kids had things he didn't, she pressed dial. Lisa? Lisa Chen? Oh my God, it's been years. How are you? David's voice was warm, friendly, completely unaware he was about to be pulled into something that would change everything. Hey David. I'm okay. Listen, I know this is weird, but I need your help with something. It's about some stones I found, and I need to know if they're real. Silence on the other end. Then, carefully, what kind of stones? I think they might be diamonds. A lot of diamonds. Another pause, longer this time. Lisa, where did you find these diamonds? That's complicated. Can we meet? I really need someone I can trust. And you're the only person I know who would even know how to tell if they're real. This sounds like something you should take to the police. Maybe. Probably. But I need to know what I'm dealing with first. Please, David. I know it's a lot to ask, but I'm desperate here. She could hear him breathing, could almost feel him calculating risks versus old loyalty. Finally. Okay. But somewhere public. And Lisa, if these are stolen or... I know what I'm risking. I just need to know if I'm risking it for something real, or if I'm about to make a fool of myself over fake stones and costume jewelry. They met at a Starbucks, halfway between Riverside and Columbus, neutral territory, where neither of them would be recognized. Lisa arrived early, the container hidden in her cleaning supply bag, trying to look like a regular person getting coffee, and not someone carrying what might be millions of dollars in stolen diamonds. David looked good. Success suited him, Lisa thought with a pang of envy. Nice clothes, expensive watch, the kind of confident posture that came from never worrying about money. He hugged her when he arrived, and she felt the gulf between their lives in that embrace. "You look tired," he said, and she knew what he meant. She looked poor, worn down, desperate. "It's been a rough few years." They got coffee and found a corner table. Lisa waited until no one was nearby, then carefully pulled out the container, setting it between them like a bomb that might explode. David's expression shifted when he saw it, the easy friendliness replaced by something sharper, more focused. "That's a serious-looking container. I found it in a building I bought. There are 37 more like it, all locked, all filled with stones that look like this." She opened the container just enough for him to see inside. David leaned forward, his professional curiosity clearly overriding his caution. He reached in, pulled out one of the larger stones, held it up to the light streaming through the window. His face went pale. "Oh, Jesus! Lisa, are they real?" He pulled out a small tool from his pocket, some kind of loop or magnifier, and examined the stone more closely. His hands were shaking slightly. "Lisa, this is at least 3 carats. Near flawless clarity from what I can see without proper equipment. If it's real, it's worth $50,000. Easily." Lisa's vision swam. "And if they're all real?" David set down the stone and looked at her with something like fear. "How many did you say were in each container?" "I don't know exactly. Maybe 500? 1,000? He did the math in his head, his expression growing more alarmed with each calculation. "Lisa, if these are all genuine diamonds of similar quality, you're looking at, Jesus, you could be looking at $300 million. Maybe more." The coffee shop spun around her. $300 million. The number was so big, it didn't even feel real. It was movie money, lottery money, the kind of sum that didn't exist in her world of counting pennies for school lunch money. "There has to be a mistake," she whispered. "They can't all be real. Nobody leaves that kind of money just sitting in a wall. Unless they died before they could recover them," David said quietly. "Or unless they went to prison. Or unless the authorities were getting close and they had to hide everything fast and couldn't get back to it." He looked at the container, then at her. "Lisa, where exactly did you find these?" She told him everything. The factory auction, the demolition notice, the hidden space behind the false wall. As she spoke, she watched his expression shift from concern to something like horror. "Riverside Machine Works. I've heard of that place. There was a case in the 80s, I think. A federal investigation into diamond smuggling. The theory was that someone was using industrial shipments to move stones, hiding them in legitimate cargo. They never proved anything, never made arrests, but the factory closed right after. The owner died in 1989, and he took the location of his stash to the grave." David sat back, running his hands through his hair. "God, Lisa, you didn't just find diamonds, you found the missing evidence from a 40-year-old smuggling ring. So they're definitely stolen." "Almost certainly. But proving ownership after all this time?" He shook his head. "The original owners are probably long dead or impossible to trace. The statute of limitations on theft expired decades ago. Legally, you might actually have a claim as the property owner who found them." "Might?" "I'm not a lawyer, but from what I know about treasure trove law, found property often belongs to the finder if the original owner can't be identified and there's no clear criminal claim. You bought that building at a public auction. Everything in it, including hidden compartments, would typically transfer with the deed." Lisa felt hope flare in her chest, dangerous and intoxicating. "So I could keep them?" "Maybe. But Lisa, this is going to get complicated fast. If word gets out about what you found, every treasure hunter, criminal, and con artist in 3 states is going to come looking. Not to mention federal authorities who might want to reopen the original investigation. You need to be very, very careful about what you do next. I need to survive next week." Lisa said bluntly. I'm 2 months behind on rent. My landlord has an eviction hearing scheduled. My car is dying. My son needs new shoes. I don't have the luxury of being careful. I need to turn some of these stones into money, and I need to do it fast. David was quiet for a long moment. Then, I can help. I know people, private collectors who don't ask too many questions. We could sell a few stones, enough to solve your immediate problems, while you figure out what to do with the rest. Why would you help me? Lisa asked, suspicion warring with hope. This could get you in trouble too. He smiled, sad and genuine. Because you were always kind to me in high school when nobody else was. Because you're clearly desperate, and I remember what that feels like. And because honestly, this is the most interesting thing that's happened to me in years. Lisa wanted to hug him. Wanted to cry. Instead, she closed the container carefully and said, Okay, what do we do first? First, we get these properly authenticated. I have equipment at my office. Then we photograph them, document everything. Create a paper trail showing you as the legitimate finder. Then we reach out to a few select buyers, people with money and discretion. We sell just enough to get you stabilized, maybe 20 or 30 stones. The rest we secure while you get proper legal counsel. How long will all that take? If we move fast. A week. Maybe 2. I have 3 days before they demolish the factory and destroy any evidence of where I found these. David's eyes widened. Jesus. Okay. New plan. We go to the factory right now. I document everything. The hidden space. The other containers. All of it. We create a complete record before the wrecking crew arrives. Then we move the rest of the containers somewhere safe, while we work on selling enough stones to get you breathing room. Lisa thought of Marcus at school, of the eviction notice on her refrigerator, of 7 years of barely surviving, always one crisis away from complete collapse. Okay, let's do it. They drove to the factory in David's BMW, Lisa's ancient Honda, looking even more pathetic parked next to it. The demolition notice flapped in the November wind, a reminder of how little time they had. Inside, Lisa led David to the hidden space. He went professional immediately, pulling out camera equipment and measuring tools, documenting every angle, every detail. He photographed the containers in place, the false wall, the entire factory floor for context. This is incredible, he said, his voice echoing in the empty building. The preservation, the quantity. Lisa, this might be the largest diamond cache discovered in decades. As long as it's enough to keep my son and me from being homeless, I don't care about records. They worked for hours, carefully removing all 38 containers and loading them into David's car. He'd called a friend with a secure storage facility, someplace with cameras and guards where they could keep the diamonds safe while they worked on authentication and sales. It was nearly dark when they finished, both of them exhausted and covered in dust. Lisa locked the factory door for what might be the last time, looking at the building that had been her desperate gamble, her last hope. In 3 days, it would be rubble. But it had already given her something more valuable than square footage. It had given her a chance. But the next morning brought complications Lisa hadn't anticipated. Her sister Jennifer showed up at her apartment unannounced, arms crossed, jaw set in that familiar expression of judgment that Lisa had been seeing since they were teenagers. So, it's true, Jennifer said, pushing past Lisa into the apartment. You actually spent your last $500 on that death trap. Lisa's stomach sank. She'd been avoiding her family, knowing they'd have opinions about her factory purchase. How did you know? Mom ran into Sandra Mitchell at the grocery store. You remember Sandra? Works at the county clerk's office? She told Mom all about how you bought that condemned building the city's been trying to get rid of for years. Jennifer turned to face her, hands on hips. What were you thinking, Lisa? I was thinking I needed space for my business. You needed to pay your rent. Mom said you're behind again. How are you going to take care of Marcus when you're making insane decisions like this? The words stung because they echoed Lisa's own fears. I'm handling it. Are you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're spiraling. First, Marcus's father leaves, then you drop out of nursing school, then you can't hold down a regular job, and now you're gambling on abandoned buildings? Jennifer's voice rose. When are you going to grow up and make responsible choices? Lisa felt heat rising in her chest. Jennifer, with her MBA and her corporate job and her husband who'd never missed a mortgage payment, had no idea what Lisa's life was like. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. You're broke, desperate, and making things worse with impulsive decisions. That factory is scheduled for demolition in, what, a couple days? So you just threw away money you couldn't afford to lose. I said I'm handling it. Like you handled everything else? Jennifer's expression softened slightly, but the pity was almost worse than the judgment. Lisa, I love you, but you need to face reality. You're a single mother with no education and a failing business. You can't afford to take risks like this. Maybe it's time to move back home with Mom. Let her help with Marcus while you get stable. The suggestion felt like a death sentence. Moving back to her mother's house meant admitting defeat, meant proving everyone right who'd said she'd never make it on her own. That's not happening. Then what is your plan? Because whatever you're doing now clearly isn't working. Lisa wanted to scream that she'd found $300 million in diamonds, that she was about to become wealthier than Jennifer could imagine, that she'd been right to take the risk. But she couldn't. Not yet. Not until David authenticated the stones and they'd sold enough to prove it was real. My plan is to trust myself, Lisa said quietly. Something you might not understand. Jennifer's jaw tightened. Fine. But when this all falls apart, don't come crying to me. She headed for the door, then turned back. Mom wants you to come to Thanksgiving. She thinks we should all be together, support each other. But honestly, I don't want Marcus to see you like this. So desperate and unstable. He deserves better role models. After Jennifer left, Lisa sat on her couch, shaking with anger and humiliation. Her sister's words echoed in her head, joining the chorus of doubt that had been there since she'd signed the papers on the factory. Everyone thought she was making a mistake. Everyone thought she was failing. What if they were right? What if the diamonds turned out to be fake, or worthless, or brought down trouble she couldn't handle? What if her desperate gamble really did break them? Her phone buzzed. David. Got some preliminary results from the authentication. Lisa, we need to talk. Can you come to Columbus today? The phoned drive to David's office took forever. Lisa's mind spun through possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. He'd found something wrong. The diamonds were fake. They were traceable. The police were involved. David's office was in a sleek building downtown, all glass and steel and money. Lisa felt out of place in her cleaning clothes, her broken-down car embarrassing in the visitor parking lot. But David met her at reception with a smile that told her something good had happened. Come on back. You need to see this. His office was filled with equipment Lisa couldn't identify. Microscopes, scales, machines with digital readouts. And there, spread across black velvet, were maybe 50 diamonds from her containers, glittering under bright lights. I've been testing them all morning, David said, gesturing to a computer screen filled with data, running them through every authentication protocol we have, checking for treatments, synthetics, anything that might affect value. And, he turned to face her, his expression caught between excitement and disbelief. They're real, Lisa. All of them. Not just real, but extraordinary. These are natural diamonds, most of them between 1 and 5 carats, with clarity grades ranging from VS1 to internally flawless. The color grades are mostly D through G, meaning they're essentially colorless. Lisa's legs felt weak. What does that mean in actual terms? It means each of these stones is worth between $20,000 and $200,000, depending on size and quality. And you have 38 containers full of them. He pulled up a spreadsheet on his screen. Based on what I've seen so far, my conservative estimate is $310 million. If we found some truly exceptional stones in the remaining containers, it could be higher. $310 million. The number hit Lisa like a physical force. She sat down hard in David's office chair, trying to process what he was telling her. I ran the gemological signatures against international databases. David continued. These aren't blood diamonds. They're not from any recent heists. Based on the cutting styles and some trace analysis, I'd guess most of these were cut in the 70s or early 80s, which matches your timeline for Richard Drummond's operation. So they're clean? As clean as smuggled diamonds can be. The original owners are impossible to trace after this much time. The crimes associated with them are beyond any statute of limitations. Legally, you have a strong claim as the legitimate finder on property you legally own. How fast can we sell some? David's expression grew serious. That's where we need to be careful. Flooding the market with this many stones would crash prices and raise questions. We need to move slowly, selectively. But for your immediate needs, I can have buyers lined up by tomorrow. We sell 10 stones, modest sizes to avoid attention. You'll walk away with probably $400,000. Enough to solve every crisis you're facing right now. $400,000. Enough for rent, car repairs, Marcus's needs, and more. Enough to breathe for the first time in 7 years. Lisa felt tears burning her eyes. When can we do it? Tomorrow night. I've already made calls to 3 collectors I trust. They'll meet us. Examine the stones. Pay cash. No banks, no paper trails yet. Just enough to get you stable while we plan the bigger picture. That night, Lisa picked up Marcus from her neighbor's apartment, where he'd been doing homework. She'd been paying Mrs. Thompson to watch him after school, another expense she could barely afford. As they walked back to their apartment, Marcus was unusually quiet. "Mom," Tommy Lancaster said, "you bought a building that's going to fall down on you." Lisa's jaw tightened. Tommy Lancaster's mother was friends with Jennifer. "Tommy doesn't know what he's talking about. He said, his mom said you're making bad choices." "What does that mean?" Lisa knelt down to Marcus's eye level, taking his small hands in hers. "Sometimes, baby, you have to take chances that other people don't understand. They see risk where you see possibility. It's scary, but it's also the only way things ever get better." Are things going to get better? She thought about the diamonds sitting in David's secure facility, about the sale tomorrow night, about the future that was suddenly, impossibly within reach. "Yeah, baby, things are going to get a lot better." The next evening, Lisa met David at a private club in Columbus, the kind of place she'd never been invited to before. The 3 buyers were there, middle-aged men in expensive suits who examined the 10 diamonds David had selected with professional detachment. They ran their own tests, compared notes, negotiated prices with the casual ease of people for whom 6-figure transactions were routine. 2 hours later, Lisa left with a gym bag containing $435,000 in cash. The weight of it in her hands felt impossible, surreal. David walked her to her car, both of them hyper-aware of the fortune she was carrying. "Deposit it tomorrow," he said. "Different banks, amounts under $10,000 at a time to avoid reporting requirements, then pay off your urgent debts. After that, we plan the long game." Lisa drove home, barely able to focus on the road, the gym bag sitting in her passenger seat, like it might explode. This was real. This was actually happening. Her desperate $500 gamble had paid off in ways that still didn't feel possible. The first thing she did was pay her landlord. She knocked on his door at 9 p.m. $5,000 cash in an envelope. He opened it, counted, and looked at her with surprise, and something that might have been respect. "You're all paid up, Miss Chen. 3 months ahead, even. Thank you for giving me time." Over the next week, Lisa methodically worked through her list of debts. The car repair that had been hanging over her head for months. The credit cards maxed out from emergencies. The medical bills from when Marcus had broken his arm. Each payment felt like removing a stone from her chest, making it easier to breathe. But the real test came at Thanksgiving. Her mother had insisted everyone come to dinner, including Lisa, despite Jennifer's objections. Lisa showed up with Marcus and a sense of dread, knowing her sister would have spent the last 2 weeks spreading the story of her foolish factory purchase. The judgment started as soon as they walked in. Jennifer was helping their mother in the kitchen, and Lisa could hear them talking. I just don't understand what she was thinking. That building was condemned for a reason. Maybe she had a plan, their mother said, though she didn't sound convinced. Lisa never has a plan. She just lurches from one crisis to the next, dragging Marcus along. Lisa felt Marcus squeeze her hand. He'd heard it too. She pasted on a smile and led him into the living room, where her Uncle Bob and his wife were watching football. "There's our little entrepreneur," Uncle Bob said, his tone making it clear what he thought of her business acumen. "Heard you bought some prime real estate. How's that working out for you?" "Actually, it's working out very well," Lisa said calmly. Jennifer emerged from the kitchen, eyebrows raised. "Really? Because the demolition was supposed to happen this week. Did they tear down your investment?" "They did, but I got what I needed from it first." "Which was what? Scrap metal? Old fixtures?" Jennifer's laugh was sharp. "I'm sure that'll cover what you spent on it." "Oh wait, you barely spent anything. Because nobody wanted it." Lisa felt something shift inside her. She was tired of the mockery, the assumption that she was failing. She'd spent 7 years accepting pity and judgment from her family, letting them believe she was barely holding on. And she had been barely holding on, until she'd taken a chance that everyone thought was crazy. "You're right," Lisa said quietly. "Nobody wanted it. Nobody saw its potential. Everyone thought I was making a mistake." "Because you were," Jennifer started. "I found something in that factory. Something valuable that had been hidden there for decades. Something that's going to change my life and Marcus's life completely." The room went quiet. Jennifer's expression shifted from contempt to confusion. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about being smarter than everyone gave me credit for. I'm talking about taking a risk that paid off bigger than you can imagine. And I'm talking about never listening to you tell me I'm failing again." "Lisa, what did you find?" Her mother's voice was cautious. Lisa thought about telling them everything. About the diamonds, the fortune, the future that was suddenly secure. But looking at their faces, at Jennifer's skepticism and her uncle's doubt, and the years of dismissal and pity, she realized she didn't owe them explanations. "Something that was mine to find," she said. "That's all you need to know." She took Marcus's hand and walked toward the door. Her mother called after her, but Lisa didn't turn around. She was done seeking approval from people who'd never believed in her anyway. In the car, Marcus asked, "Are we not having Thanksgiving?" "We're having our own Thanksgiving, buddy. Just you and me. Let's go get Chinese food and watch movies. What do you say?" His smile was answer enough. The next few months transformed Lisa's life in ways both obvious and subtle. She hired Patricia Hernandez, the sharp property lawyer, who specialized in treasure trove cases. Patricia filed the quiet title action, establishing Lisa's clear legal ownership of everything found within the factory. She built an airtight case that even if someone came forward claiming ownership, they'd have to prove it through decades of lost paperwork and expired claims. David continued managing the diamond sales, moving slowly to avoid market disruption. They sold approximately 100 stones over 3 months, generating $12 million that Lisa invested in stable funds through financial advisors. Patricia recommended. Lisa bought a house. Nothing ostentatious, just a 3-bedroom ranch in a good school district where Marcus could have his own room and a backyard. She paid cash, which raised eyebrows at the real estate closing, but her lawyer had prepared documentation showing legitimate found property sales with all taxes paid. The questioning started when Jennifer drove past Lisa's new house and saw the for sale sign on the old apartment building. She called, demanding to know how Lisa could afford to buy a house. "I sold some assets," Lisa said simply. "What assets? You clean houses, Lisa. What could you possibly have to sell worth enough to buy property?" "The things I found in the factory. I told you it was valuable." There was a long pause. "How valuable?" "Valuable enough that Marcus and I are secure. That's all you need to know." But Jennifer couldn't let it go. She showed up at Lisa's new house unannounced, walking through rooms that were still mostly empty, counting windows and calculating costs. "This place is worth at least $300,000. Where did you get that kind of money?" "I told you. You found something in a demolished factory that was worth $300,000. Jennifer's voice was sharp with disbelief. "What buried treasure? A stash of gold bars?" Lisa met her sister's eyes steadily. "Something like that." "Bullshit. You're up to something illegal. Drug money, maybe. Or you've got yourself mixed up with some loan shark who's going to come collecting. Or maybe I was smart enough to see an opportunity everyone else missed. Maybe I took a chance you were too scared to take. And maybe you can't stand that the sister you've been pitying for years is doing better than you expected." Jennifer's face flushed. "If you're in trouble, if you're putting Marcus in danger with whatever scheme, Marcus is safer now than he's ever been. We have a home. I'm putting money aside for his college. We don't struggle anymore. That should make you happy for us. But instead, you're here questioning everything because you can't believe I succeeded at something you thought was stupid." "It's not about." Jennifer stopped, seeming to realize she couldn't finish that sentence honestly. "Fine. Keep your secrets. But when this all comes crashing down, don't expect me to pick up the pieces." "I won't," Lisa said. "I never have." The truth was, Jennifer wasn't the only one with questions. Neighbors wondered about the single mom who'd moved into a nice house with cash. The few cleaning clients Lisa kept asked how business had suddenly gotten so good. Marcus's new school wanted to know about their financial situation for lunch programs and aid. Lisa kept her answers vague and consistent. She'd found valuable items in a property she owned. She'd sold them legally, paid all taxes, consulted lawyers. It was boring, mundane, and completely legal. Most people eventually accepted it because the alternative, that Lisa had stumbled into a massive fortune, seemed too unlikely. But the biggest changes were internal. The constant anxiety that had been Lisa's companion for 7 years began to fade. She slept through the night. She smiled without having to force it. She watched Marcus thrive and didn't feel the gnawing guilt that came from not being able to give him everything he needed. She kept working, though she cut back to part-time, maintaining her cleaning business because she liked the work and the clients who'd stuck with her through the hard years. But now it was a choice, not a survival mechanism. The difference was everything. David became an unlikely but genuine friend, helping her navigate the complex world of diamond sales and wealth management. They sold stones slowly, carefully, always through reputable dealers who authenticated and documented each transaction. No questions, no scandal, just legitimate business dealings. The factory was demolished completely, turned into a parking lot for a new shopping center. Lisa drove past it sometimes, remembering the desperate woman who'd bid $500 on a half-ruined building because she was out of options. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone from another life. 1 year after finding the diamonds, Lisa stood in Marcus's new school for parent-teacher conference night. His teacher gushed about his progress, his confidence, how he'd come out of his shell. "Whatever you're doing at home," the teacher said, "it's working." What she was doing was simple: She was no longer drowning. She was present, patient, able to focus on her son instead of survival. The diamonds hadn't bought happiness, exactly, but they'd removed the barriers that made happiness impossible. That evening, Marcus asked the question she'd been expecting. "Mom, how come we have money now? Did you win the lottery?" Lisa sat him down, choosing her words carefully. "I found something valuable in that building I bought. Something that had been lost for a very long time. We sold it legally, paid all our taxes, and now we're secure. But Marcus, this stays between us, okay? We don't talk about it with friends or at school. We just live our lives. Like a secret treasure?" "Exactly like that." He nodded, satisfied with the explanation. At 8, he didn't need to know about smuggling rings or federal investigations or the moral complexity of profiting from someone else's crimes. He just needed to know they were safe. 2 years after the factory, Lisa established the Chen Family Foundation, a small non-profit focused on helping single parents in crisis. She funded it anonymously, working through Patricia to set up the structure. The foundation paid rent for families facing eviction, provided emergency car repairs, covered medical bills and school expenses. Every person they helped was someone Lisa had been, someone one crisis away from total collapse. She couldn't save everyone, but she could save some, and doing so eased the complicated feelings she had about the diamonds, about profiting from theft, even if that theft had happened before she was born. The foundation's motto, suggested by Patricia and enthusiastically approved by Lisa, was simple. Sometimes, the things nobody else wants turn out to be exactly what we need. Lisa never forgot that she'd bought a demolished factory for $500 because she was desperate, that she'd found diamonds because she was willing to tear apart what everyone else had abandoned, and she never let herself believe she deserved the fortune more than anyone else who might have found it. She'd been lucky. That was all. Lucky in her timing. Lucky in her desperation. Lucky that David had been willing to help. The diamonds had been there all along, waiting for someone to look behind the walls everyone else assumed were solid. But she'd been smart too. Smart enough to move carefully, to get help, to build legitimacy before going public. Smart enough to prioritize security over ostentation, her son's well-being over displays of wealth. Smart enough to know that $300 million could disappear as fast as it appeared if she wasn't careful. 5 years after the factory, Marcus was 13, thriving in middle school, talking about college like it was a given rather than an impossible dream. Lisa had sold about half the diamonds, the proceeds invested in stable funds that generated more money than she could spend in several lifetimes. The rest she kept, secured in multiple locations, a legacy for Marcus and whatever family he might have someday. Insurance against the world's cruelty, proof that sometimes desperate gambles paid off. The Chen Family Foundation had grown beyond anything Lisa initially imagined. What started as anonymous help for a few families had evolved into a comprehensive support network, serving over 200 single parents across 3 counties. Patricia had helped her hire a small staff, professional social workers who understood both the practical and emotional needs of families in crisis. The first recipient Lisa ever met in person was a woman named Carmen Rodriguez. She'd shown up at the foundation office 3 years after Lisa established it, asking to speak with whoever ran the program. Lisa happened to be there that day, reviewing grant applications in a back office. "I don't know who you are," Carmen had said when Lisa finally agreed to meet her. "But 3 years ago, your foundation paid my rent when I was 2 days from eviction. My daughter was 6 months old. I'd just left an abusive relationship with nothing but a garbage bag of clothes and a baby I didn't know how to feed." Lisa remembered the application. Single mother, fleeing, domestic violence, working 2 part-time jobs that barely covered daycare. The foundation had paid 3 months of rent and security deposit on a new apartment. plus covered daycare costs for 6 months. Your people didn't just give me money, Carmen continued, her voice thick with emotion. They gave me time. Time to heal, time to find a better job, time to figure out how to be a mom without someone telling me I was doing it wrong. Because of you, my daughter is 3 now. She's healthy. She's happy. She'll never remember the apartment where her father threw things at walls. She'll only know the home where we've been safe. Carmen pulled out a photograph. A little girl with dark curls and a gap-toothed smile, holding a stuffed bunny almost as big as she was. This is Isabella. I wanted you to see her, to know that what you did mattered, that it wasn't just a number on a form or a check someone cut. It was my daughter's entire childhood. Lisa had cried then, holding that photograph, seeing in Isabella's smile all the reasons she'd built the foundation in the first place. Carmen wasn't unique. The foundation's files were full of stories like hers. Single fathers, working night shifts to be home when their kids got out of school. Mothers going back to school after years away, finally able to afford tuition and childcare. Families staying together because an emergency car repair didn't spiral into job loss and homelessness. But it was the story of Michael Torres that really crystallized what the foundation meant. Michael was 19, studying engineering at Ohio State, on a full scholarship the foundation provided for children of recipients. His mother, Elena, had been helped by the foundation 7 years earlier when Michael was 12, and his father had died unexpectedly of a heart attack. Lisa attended the scholarship ceremony where Michael received his award. She sat in the back, as always preferring anonymity, but Michael's speech made her forget about remaining invisible. My father died when I was 12, Michael said, his voice carrying across the auditorium. My mom worked as a hotel housekeeper, and suddenly she was doing it alone, trying to keep us in our apartment and food on the table and me in school. I remember the night she sat me down and said, we might have to move in with my uncle in Cleveland, that I'd have to change schools, leave my friends. She was crying, and my mom never cried. He paused, gathering himself. Then something happened. Someone helped us. Someone we'd never met paid our rent for 6 months. They covered my school expenses. They made sure I could stay in the robotics club I loved because they paid for the fees my mom couldn't afford. They gave my mother breathing room, and in that breathing room, she found a better job. We stabilized. We survived. Michael looked out at the audience. I don't know who runs the Chen family foundation. They've always stayed anonymous. But whoever you are, wherever you are, I want you to know that I'm going to be an engineer. I'm going to build things that matter. And when I start making real money, I'm going to do for other kids what you did for me. Because you didn't just help my family. You showed me that when you have resources, you have responsibility. That's a lesson I'll carry forever. Lisa left the ceremony early, overwhelmed. She sat in her car in the parking lot, hands shaking, understanding for the first time the full weight of what she'd created. The diamonds had given her money. Yes, but they'd also given her purpose. A way to transform someone else's crime into dozens of second chances. But the foundation work also forced her to confront questions she'd been avoiding. Late one night, working through applications in her home office, she came across one that stopped her cold. The applicant was named Sarah Drummond Hayes, a single mother of 2 living in Riverside. The surname made Lisa's heart race. She dug deeper, accessing public records through Patricia's legal databases. Sarah was Richard Drummond's granddaughter. Her father, Drummond's only son, had died of a drug overdose when Sarah was 15. Sarah had grown up poor, her grandfather's mysterious wealth having disappeared before she was born, leaving the family with nothing but debt and whispers about where the money had gone. Now Sarah was 32, working as a nursing assistant, struggling to support 2 kids after a divorce. Her application was straightforward. She needed help with rent after her hours had been cut. She qualified for the foundation's assistance by every measure. Lisa stared at the application for an hour. This woman was Richard Drummond's direct descendant. If anyone had a moral claim to the diamonds, it was her. The money Lisa had built her entire new life on had been stolen by this woman's grandfather, hidden away where his own family couldn't access it. She called Patricia at 11 p.m. "I need your advice on something. An ethical question, not a legal one." Lisa explained the situation. Patricia was quiet for a long time. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know. Part of me thinks I should tell her everything. Give her a larger share of the money since it was her grandfather's, even if he stole it. Part of me thinks that opens doors that should stay closed. And part of me wonders if helping her through the foundation, without her knowing the connection, is the right middle ground. What does your gut tell you?" Lisa thought about it. That I should help her the same way I'd help anyone else. That the sins of her grandfather aren't her burden, and neither is the restitution for those sins. That the money stopped being his the moment he died, and it stopped being crime proceeds the moment I found it and started using it for good. "Then there's your answer," Patricia said gently. The Chen Family Foundation approved Sarah Drummond Hayes' application. Over the next 2 years, they helped her pay for nursing, school, covered childcare costs, provided emergency funds when her son needed surgery. Sarah never knew that the foundation that saved her family was funded by the grandfather she'd grown up hearing stories about. The man whose mysterious disappearance and hidden fortune had been family legend. Lisa watched Sarah's progress through regular foundation reports, saw her graduate nursing school, get a better job at a hospital, move her kids into a safer neighborhood, saw her, in other words, live the life Richard Drummond's crimes had stolen from his own family. And Lisa realized that this, more than anything else, was justice. Not legal justice, not cosmic justice, but human justice. Taking money earned through crime and transforming it into opportunity for the criminal's own descendants. Breaking cycles instead of perpetuating them. By the time Marcus turned 16, the relationship between Lisa and her family had thawed slightly. Not because Jennifer had apologized or her mother had acknowledged she'd been wrong about the factory, but because time had a way of smoothing sharp edges, and because Marcus wanted to know his aunt and grandmother. They met for dinner at a restaurant, neutral territory. Jennifer arrived first, looking older than Lisa remembered, tired in a way that expensive clothes couldn't hide. Their mother came next, walking slower than before, leaning on a cane. "You look well," her mother said, and there was something in her voice that might have been regret. "Marcus has grown so much." Marcus, poised and confident in ways that still surprised Lisa, shook hands with his grandmother and hugged his aunt. "It's good to see you both." They ordered food, made small talk about Marcus's school and his interests. He was applying to colleges, he told them. Thinking about business school, maybe engineering. He had options, he said casually, not understanding how those words landed on people who remembered when options had been in desperately short supply. "Your mother must be very proud," Jennifer said, and there was no sarcasm in it, just statement of fact. "She is," Marcus replied. "She taught me that sometimes the best opportunities are the ones nobody else wants, that you have to be brave enough to take chances." Jennifer's eyes met Lisa's across the table. Something passed between them, unspoken. An acknowledgement, perhaps, that Jennifer had been wrong, that Lisa's desperate gamble had been exactly what it needed to be. "I owe you an apology," Jennifer said quietly, after Marcus and their mother had gone to look at desserts. "For what I said, for what I thought about you. I was cruel, and I was wrong." "You were scared," Lisa replied. "Scared that I was making a mistake that would hurt Marcus. I can't fault you for that. It was more than that." Jennifer's hands twisted her napkin. "I was jealous. You were willing to risk everything on a chance. I've never done that. I've played it safe my entire life, and I resented you for being braver than me." Then, when you actually succeeded, when your risk paid off, it felt like proof that I'd been too afraid to live fully. Lisa reached across the table, touching her sister's hand. You were brave in different ways. You built a stable life. You gave your kids security. That took a different kind of courage, but you gave Marcus security and possibility. You showed him that calculated risks are worth taking. I taught my kids to be afraid. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Jennifer asked the question Lisa knew had been coming. Are you ever going to tell me what you really found in that factory? Lisa smiled. Something valuable enough to build a different life. That's all that matters. Is it legal? Are you safe? Completely legal. Patricia Hernandez has made sure of that. Every stone sold with documentation, every penny of taxes paid, everything above board. Stones? Jennifer's eyes widened slightly. That's all I'm going to say. Jennifer nodded slowly. Okay. But Lisa, whatever you found, whatever you did with it, I'm glad. You deserved a win. You'd been through enough. It wasn't a complete reconciliation. Too much had been said, too much hurt inflicted on both sides, but it was a beginning. A acknowledgement that families could wound and heal, that sisters could be wrong and forgiven, that the past didn't have to define the future. Marcus's college years brought new challenges. He got into Stanford, his first choice, and Lisa wrote the tuition check without hesitation. But she worried about him being so far from home, about the wealthy students he'd be surrounded by, about whether he'd remember where he came from. Her worries proved unfounded. Marcus came home for Christmas his freshman year, full of stories about his roommate who'd grown up on a reservation in New Mexico, his study group that included kids from 15 different countries, the research project he was working on that might help provide clean water to developing communities. Everyone there has money, he told her one night. But most of them don't know what it's like not to have it. They've never been scared about rent or food or whether they'd have heat in winter. I'm glad I remember those times, Mom. It keeps me grounded. I tried to protect you from knowing how bad things were, Lisa admitted. I knew anyway. Kids always know. But you never let it break you. You kept fighting, kept working, kept looking for opportunities. That's what I remember most. Not the fear, but your courage. By Marcus's senior year, he'd been accepted into Stanford's graduate program in engineering with full funding. He'd also been offered positions at 3 major tech companies, each with starting salaries that made Lisa's head spin. I'm thinking about deferring the job offers, he told her during spring break. Maybe doing some non-profit work first. There's an organization that builds infrastructure in underserved communities. They need engineers willing to work for almost nothing. Almost nothing? Lisa smiled. How nothing? Like $40,000 a year. Nothing. Lisa thought about the $300 million in diamonds she'd found, about the foundation that had helped hundreds of families, about the example she'd tried to set for her son. If that's what you want to do, I support you completely. Even though I could be making $200,000 at Google, especially because you could be making $200,000 at Google. Money you can make later. Experience changing lives you need to get while you still have the energy and idealism to handle how hard it is. Marcus hugged her, and in that embrace, Lisa felt the culmination of every choice she'd made since that November evening, when she'd broken open a container in a condemned factory. The diamonds had given them financial security, yes. But they'd also given her the freedom to raise her son with values that mattered, to show him that wealth was a tool, not a goal, that the real measure of success was what you did for others. The factory where it had all started was long gone, paved over and forgotten. But its legacy lived on in every family the foundation helped, in every scholarship awarded, in the young man Marcus had become. In lives transformed by second chances and opportunities that had seemed impossible until someone made them real. Lisa understood now that the treasure she'd found wasn't just the diamonds, It was the potential they represented. The chance to break cycles of poverty, to give others the breathing room she desperately needed, to prove that one person's choice to look where everyone else had given up could change dozens of lives. Richard Drummond had hidden those diamonds, thinking he'd come back for them someday. He'd died alone, his fortune buried, his family left with nothing. But Lisa had found them. And instead of keeping them buried in different ways, instead of hoarding them or spending them on luxury, she'd released them into the world to do the work they should have done all along. Creating opportunity, providing second chances, transforming desperate gambles into sustainable futures. The demolished factory was gone, paved over, forgotten by everyone except the woman who'd bought it for $500 and found more than $300 million in return. The best investment she'd ever made. Though the real return wasn't measured in dollars. She thought sometimes about Richard Drummond, the man who'd smuggled the diamonds and died before he could retrieve them. She wondered if he'd had family, people who'd deserved that money more than she did. But Patricia had been thorough in her research. Drummond had been alone, a career criminal with no spouse, no children, no one left to mourn him. The diamonds had been stolen from their original owners decades ago, sold and resold through black markets until their provenance was impossible to trace. Returning them wasn't an option. They belonged to no one, which meant they belonged to whoever found them. And Lisa had found them. Lisa, who'd needed them most, who'd turned them into a life for her son and help for others struggling the way she had struggled. If that wasn't justice, it was at least something like mercy. The demolished factory was gone, paved over, forgotten by everyone except the woman who'd bought it for $500 and found more than $300 million in return. The best investment she'd ever made, though the real return wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in Marcus's laughter, in sleeping through the night without anxiety dreams, in the families the foundation had kept together, in the quiet, steady security of knowing that tomorrow wouldn't bring financial disaster because tomorrow was taken care of. Lisa Chen had been a single mother, cleaning houses and hoping for something better. Now she was a single mother, cleaning houses sometimes, because she wanted to, funding scholarships and emergency grants, watching her son grow up with opportunities she'd never had. The diamonds had been hidden for 40 years, waiting for someone to find them. And when that someone finally came, desperate and determined, they'd transformed not just one life but dozens, because Lisa had learned that the real treasure wasn't what you kept but what you did with it. Richard Drummond had died alone, with his fortune buried in factory walls. Lisa would die someday surrounded by people whose lives she'd touched, whose children had stayed fed and housed, whose emergencies hadn't become catastrophes because someone had helped. That was worth more than all the diamonds ever smuggled, ever sold, ever hidden behind false walls in abandoned factories. Lisa had started with $500 and desperation. She'd found $300 million in diamonds and hope, but the real fortune was simpler. She'd found a way forward, not just for herself, but for everyone she could reach. And it had all started with a demolished factory nobody else wanted, bought by a woman who refused to give up, even when giving up would have been easier. Sometimes the greatest treasures hide in the places everyone else abandons. Sometimes you have to be desperate enough to look. Lisa Chen had looked, and what she found changed everything. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.